Hey, I'm Jack Aiken from Coldwell Banker Styles, and it's the 4th of July, and we are not talking real estate today. We're going to talk about America and what this day actually means. If you think about it from the very beginning, America was a vast source of natural resources, and the people that came here were either looking for religious freedom to get rich quick, or they were an adventurer. And most of them couldn't afford the passage, the 3,000 miles in a rickety boat to get here, so they came as indentured servants. They told somebody with money, hey, your farm over there, I'll work it for 5 years to pay for the expenses of you sending me here. They produced tobacco, cotton, whale oil, lumber, furs, and they sent it all back to England for the people in England to process and get rich, and it was kind of a one-sided deal. They were English citizens, but they didn't have the rights of Englishmen. They had no representation. And eventually, over time, the colonials needed defending from warring Indians, from the French. It became expensive to maintain the colonies, and the Crown and Parliament decided, hey, we need the colonists to start paying for their own defense, which, today doesn't seem like a bad idea, but when they started instituting these new taxes and restrictions and regulations, one of the great American gifts in life is the ability to complain and gripe. And so the more taxes, the more regulations that the government instituted on people, the more they complained. Now, the more discontent, the more the Crown started getting aggravated, whatever. And one of the things that they came up with was, if we have to have more soldiers to keep order over here or to protect you, if you've got an extra bedroom in the back, you've got to let him stay with you. And you've got to feed him and take care of him, and people didn't take that very well. And so discontent started building, and the more rules and regulations that came about, the people saw it as more and more tyranny, and they responded with boycotts and discontent and smuggling, and they even got to the point where they tossed English tea into the Boston harbor as a protest against tea taxes and so forth. By 1770, not 1970, by 1770, things were so belligerent in Boston that some troops in town were getting pelted with snowballs and sticks and obscenities. And if you've ever met a New England Patriots fan on game day in football, you understand. So the troops got so panicky that they opened fire, and 5 loyalists were killed, including Crispus Attucks, a sailor who had just gotten off his boat in the last few days from a trip to the Bahamas. And he was actually the first American killed. And yes, it's the same Crispus Attucks whose high school here in town has been named. To patch things up, by 1774, the colony said, look, we need to figure out a way past all this. So they brought representatives from all the colonies to get together and figure out how to approach the king. They thought they had legitimate gripes and grievances, so they put together a list and they sent it to the king as citizens. And the king was so impressed, he blew it off, didn't even read it, and labeled them all as in rebellion, which led to more discontent. And eventually, by 1775, some of the locals started collecting arms and training a militia, and getting together because they thought trouble was on the horizon. Well, the military governor found out about this. He sent troops marching out to Lexington to arrest the agitators and confiscate weaponry. And forewarned by William Dawes and Paul Revere, the Minutemen showed up, with their chests all puffed out, and showed that, hey, we're not going to take this lying down. And shots were fired, and several colonials were killed and dispersed and ran off. And the English marched on out to Concord Bridge, and where more locals had gathered, and there was another exchange of gunfire, and the British grabbed some of the local munitions and burned them. But something weird kind of happened. The smoke from the burning got up, and the people in the surrounding areas saw it and assumed that the British were burning the town. And they grabbed their squirrel gun and they came running. And all the way from Concord on the back roads back to Boston, they sniped at the British from behind trees and logs and fences. And it was a catastrophe for the British, who barely got back to Boston. And the Revolutionary War started, and it lasted 8 years. So what does that have to do with the 4th of July? So while all this is going on, the Continental Congress is still trying to patch things up with the king. And for the next year, they reached out and they tried to do it, until eventually, a year later, they determined that there was no way things could be patched up. Now, these were all men of means. These all were guys that had wealthy families and were doing well, and they realized that if they tried to start their own country and get away from the crown, that they would be labeled as traitors, and if they lost, they'd be hanged and their families would be ruined. And so they risked everything. And so these 56 delegates got together and they argued. If you're in a big enough family, you know what it's like to try and figure out who's hosting Christmas this year or Thanksgiving, and the arguments and the hurt feelings and back and forth. Well, imagine trying to create a country that's never existed, unlike anything ever before. After months and months of discussion and argument, and again, compromise after compromise, they finally came up with a document all 56 men would sign. And they realized that it wasn't a finished product, so they put together, in principle, the ideas of how they could amend it. But that came for years. So finally, on July 4, 1776, the document that all 56 of these men had signed was published. They knew it wasn't perfect, but it was a start. So take a moment on the 4th from your hot dogs and your hamburgers and your nice cold beer, and think for a second about the people that made it possible. I'm Jack Aiken from Coldwell Banker Styles. If you need to get a hold of me for anything, give me a call, 317-947-4515. You can check out my website, jackaiken.com. That's jackaikin.com. And until next time, be well, be safe, enjoy America.